show you how to import your invoices and your payments into Carrotsuite. So let's say you have a load of previous invoices and payments that you want to import into Carrotsuite platform. The first thing you need to do is to format it accordingly, and that's what I want to show you here. So you may have another software you are using, or you may have another you may have it on Excel, so you need to rearrange it to follow this format. So here we go. First is the file number. You get file number is like a representative ID of your client. It can for short be their phone numbers. For short, it can be their phone numbers, or you can use a filing system. If you have a filing system existing, you can use the numbering on that filing system for each client as their file number. This file number must correlate with the same number on their customer biodata when you are formatting it. You get? So if you don't have an existing filing system and you want to just do one quickly, you can just use their phone numbers. Important thing is that it must be a unique ID, and it must correlate with their same ID or file number on their customer biodata, because it's a field there as well, because the application uses this to match their names and their biodata to their invoice information. So next is the date of payment. So one other thing I want to explain quickly is the rows. You can see the first row of any file number is called installment 0. Installment 0 captures the full invoice information. A client can have one invoice and multiple payments. So the full invoice information is what is captured in installment 0, not the payment, because the invoice usually comes before payment. You get invoice like tells us this is the total sum of amount the client is to pay on a particular transaction, why the payment are the different payments made on that transaction. So that total sum the client is to pay is what we capture in installment 0. And then when capturing installment 0, you can see the amount. The amount written here on the amount column for installment 0 must be the total invoice amount divided by the quantity or the number of plots on that invoice. You get, let's say the number of plots on the invoice is 3 and the total invoice amount is 300,000. Installment 0 is 100,000. You get, then on this quantity column we'll put 3. What the application does is to multiply the amount by the quantity on installment 0 to get the total invoice amount. So please ensure you follow it that way. So first column is file number, second column is date of payment. Make sure you follow the arrangement of this date the way it is: day, month, year, day, month, year, and year written in full. So 08/08/2018, year written in full, day/month/year. Make sure it is followed. So if it's written like August 2018, you need to change it to 08/08/2018 if the date is 8, of course. So the next is the due date of the invoice, which is optional. You get, but if the invoice has a due date, you can include it here. Then the next is transaction ID, which is also optional. It's more like when payment is made or the invoice is created, the ID of the invoice or the payment. Next is payment method. For installment 0, there's no need for payment method. You get, it's only payment method is only needed for subsequent payments on that invoice. Then the amount, like I said, for installment 0, it captures the total invoice amount divided by the quantity or the number of plots on that particular invoice. So that's what you write there. But for the different payments, the exact payment that was made, you get the first installment, the second installment, the third installment, you have to capture it that way. So the rows must reflect the number of payments that have been made on that invoice. So if payments have made on that invoice 10 times, it means it's going to have 11 rows. The first row will be installment 0, the second row will be installment 1, the third one will be installment 2, the fourth one will be installment 3, on and on like that. So I believe you understand what I'm trying to say. First row will always be installment 0, which is the total invoice amount divided by the quantity or the number of plots. Second row will be installment 1, which is the first payment that was made on that invoice. Installment 2, the second payment that was made on that invoice. So if you look at it, Installment 2 includes the date of payment, the date that first payment was made. There's no need for due date because the payment due date is only on the invoice. You don't have due date on payment. So the transaction ID, if any, that was generated or that was sent to maybe teller number, is not compulsory but is necessary. Then the payment method, the bank, but I'll suggest you use the bank code. The bank code, when you are registering banks on Carrotsuite, there's a space for bank code, so you can just put the bank code that captured or that received that payment under payment method. Just use the bank code of that bank that received the payment, then the amount, how much was paid, then installment, which installment is this the first, the second, the third, or the fourth. So you have to arrange it in order. Then the invoice ID. If, for instance, a client with a file number 360 can have multiple invoices, you can have this transaction, the other transaction, the other transaction. So what you do is the invoice ID of this particular transaction, in case it has multiple invoices or multiple transactions with you, you have to make sure to enter this particular invoice ID. If he has only one invoice transaction, then it is optional. But if he has multiple invoice transactions, it's necessary for you to enter unique invoice ID. If you don't have any, you can just formulate any and put there, maybe 360A for the first invoice, another invoice 360B, you get. So you can just formulate. Then the marketer ID, that's the ID of the marketer that brought in that client. Marketers are like your consultants or your partners or your referrals, those ones that brought in that particular customer. The purpose of this is for your commission calculation, because if the customer hasn't finished paying and he pays again, the marketer ID will be used to generate the commission for that particular marketer that brought the customer. Then the next column is the square meters. So square meters, you can only enter square meters for you can enter square meters for installment 0. So square meters is basically entered for installment 0, you get. So this is the square meters in the invoice, you get. This is not the total square meters. If it's buying 3 plots, just enter only square meter for 1 plot. So the application will multiply the square meters by the quantity to get the total square meters, you get. So don't enter, if it's buying 3 plots, let's say each plot is 500 square meters, now enter 1500. No, just enter 500 square meters. Just enter 500 square meters. So the next is the item 1. So item 1 indicates maybe deed of assignment, survey plan, or any of those documents he needed to pay for. So when you are registering, first of all, you need to register this document on Carrotsuite inventory section, and then you will use the ID of that document, the item number, to replace this item 1 here. So you will change item 1 to the item number of the document. If there are multiple documents, the first one can be deed, for instance, second one can be survey, for instance, third one can be contract of sales. So use the same ID of that document when you are registering it on the inventory section in Carrotsuite. So you need to register it first, then copy the item number and put it on these headers, you get, to represent the items that were being paid for or that are being paid for. So this represents the amount paid, then colon the quantity or the number of plots being paid for. You get the amount paid, then colon the total amount to be paid, then colon the quantity or the number of plots involved. So if this payment, this is telling us this is how much this person is to pay for this particular deed, you get. Then what now happens is, if he pays the first one, it has to form an installment line of his own. So let's say the payment on the invoice consists of land, which is 100k, and then that's deed, which is 50k. So what happens is, land comes first, then all the payments on land. Then when you now start adding payment for deed, it will form another line on the installment on the rows. It form another row. So that can be installment 5, for instance, installment 5. Then in the column or in the cell under the column under the column of that deed, you will enter the amount that was paid on that item at that time. So this is how to format your invoice documents. I hope you understand. Let me just recap a bit. File number, date of payment, due date, very optional, and is only necessary for invoices, not for payments. So the first row for every file number is usually installment zero, and installment zero captures the total amount to be paid on that invoice, and the amount you register on the amount column for installment zero is the total amount on invoice divided by the number of plots or the quantity of items on that invoice. You get? So let's say the total amount on invoice is 200k, the number of plots on the invoice is 2 plots, so what you enter on the amount for installment zero is 100k. That's total amount 200k divided by 2, that gives you 100. Then in the quantity column you insert the number of plots involved. So for the square meters, you insert the square meters, not the total square meters for 2 plots. Let's say one plot is 500 square meters and you have 2 plots on the invoice, you insert 500 square meters, and then the application will multiply it by 2 to have the total. So but for you, just insert square meters for just one plot. Thank you very much.